Rich. Are you seeing me okay?
I see you great. How are you?
Fine, thanks. I happen to have some time off this afternoon, so this is good timing.
Wonderful. Actually, I should say I see just a still image of you. I don't see a video, but I'm recording now, so we'll have a recording of whatever conversation we have and whatever video we can capture. So,
Sure.
can you see me okay?
Yeah, I see you fine.
Great. It's really nice to finally talk to you. I am so sorry about this weekend. My apologies.
I understand things come up.
Let's have this conversation, and then perhaps we can reschedule another conversation where I can speak with the folks in attendance if you're having multiple meetings, and then
Correct.
we can have that personal connection. Can you tell me just very briefly the event? I know it's associated with the Rotary, but remind me who will be in attendance there.
Okay, so Rotary has youth clubs in the schools called Interact clubs.
Right.
It's where children between the ages of 14 and 18 become mentored by Rotary clubs in their district.
Right.
So we mentor two clubs. The schools are called Hillview College and St. Joseph's Convent. It's an all-boys school on one end and an all-girls on the other end, with some co-ed education at the upper levels. So there are going to be 60 students in attendance. We have chosen it that way because we want the project to be manageable at the beginning.
Right.
And when we go to the pilot phase and see our problems, then we can invite more schools, more groups, more students to take part. But this is actually the first time they will be learning about the Enable Foundation.
Wonderful.
And the steps involved in carrying out this project.
Great. Well, that we are very excited, and both we are seeing great interest from high schools in this work, and senior high school students. And also, we are looking. Our foundation has primarily been very U.S. focused. Although I'm Canadian, I live here in the United States now, and most of the schools that have come on board have been here in the U.S. So we are looking to broaden our reach geographically and globally. So we're very excited to have the conversation. And I'm very aware of the wonderful work done by Rotary. We have a Rotary here in the town where I live, so it'd be nice to potentially look for ways to connect other Rotary organizations. So.
Sure.
So go ahead, and I saw the questions that you sent me, but perhaps if there's anything that you would like me to focus on, I'm happy to tell you anything about both my personal story, which is actually kind of interesting,
Right.
and the story of my family and my son, but also just where things are going with our education initiative, but also the direction that things are going with the Enable Community Foundation. So hit me with your questions.
Okay, I think it would be great to start with your personal story because I'm sure that's how you first got into it.
Yep.
So that would be nice. And then move on to the actual work being done via your educators'
Wonderful.
collaboration.
Great. So I live currently in Massachusetts. I'm at a school called Brookwood School. We're a pre-K to 8th grade, so that's 4 years old up to 14 or so years old. So my son Max, who is 6 years old now, was born with a condition called symbrachydactyly, and that was a disruption in the flow of blood as his arm was developing. And when he was born with a right hand that had the hand bones, so he had metacarpals, but he does not have any finger bones. And so when he was born, that did not seem to have any great impact on his energy level or his ability to do things. And my wife and I, were not really pursuing any prosthetics or any interventions. But when he was 3 years old, in 2013, I came across a YouTube video. So don't let anybody tell you that YouTube videos are not potentially life-changing. So I came across a YouTube video that was put together by a South African carpenter and an American. I can best describe him as an artist. He's a props designer, and together they had created on making a very simple prosthetic for Richard, who was the South African carpenter, as he had cut his fingers off in a carpentry accident the year before. So they had designed this little prosthetic for him, made out of metal, And then they realized that they could actually make a prosthetic out of metal for a young child that Richard knew. And as they were building that out of metal, somebody said, "Oh, do you know about 3D designing?" And they didn't really know, but they said, "You can actually design the components in a 3D CAD file, and then you could actually print them off." So they did a little research, and they realized that in fact they didn't need to use metal anymore. They could design all the components out of with the 3D designing, and then print it off in plastic and construct the hand. So when they did that, they realized that they could then post the files for that prosthetic hand open source online. And this is in 2013. They went ahead and did that, and that allowed anybody anywhere with a computer connection and access to a 3D printer to download the files, print them off, and then construct a mechanical functional prosthetic. So I came across a little video that they had done and realized that the device that they had created would be interesting to have one for my son, who was very young. He was only 3. So I Skyped with them and asked what they thought about the possibility of doing this. And in the conversation, um, not only did I think that that would make a really interesting project for my son, but I realized this could be an incredible opportunity for my students as well. So at the time I was an 8th grade science teacher. My life has now taken a different path because of this work. But at the time I was an 8th grade science teacher. And so I created a project over the course of the 2013 school year where I worked with 12 14-year-olds, and they built a functional prosthetic for my son that in the end worked. So this is the one that they built, and that activity. So there were not other schools that were doing this work, as far as I knew. There may have been, but we were completely on our own. So we printed the pieces off. We got all the hardware, whatever we needed, and these students built that. And in the process of doing that, I realized this was an incredibly profound experience for my students, obviously for my son, for myself as well. And kind of launched me into this world that I was not expecting to be in, to do with both three. We didn't have a 3D printer at our school at the time. We found another school that had one. And so that began both my journey into this world, my son's journey into this world. It involved the school that I'm at, Brookwood, into this, and now we have a thriving Enable Community Foundation program here. And also was really an important piece in terms of bringing schools on board. So with that, more and more schools gradually came on board. And in fact, at this point, the work that we had done here was not very widely known, but other schools started to come to this work, especially schools that had 3D printers and were looking for authentic uses for them. So as the number of schools started to grow, and not only that, but as the number of devices started to grow, so one of the things, in addition to being able to download the files and print them off, it's also possible to download the files and modify them in such a way that you can use the engineering cycle or the iterative process to improve the devices. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Can you see me okay?
You have to bring it more close to your face.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the video is
Maybe
working.
turn it.
So
Yeah,
from this,
yeah.
from this original design, which only this part here is 3D printed. The rest, this is material that is used by hospitals to make splints, and there's a lot of metal hardware. So from there, this design was created, and this is called a cyborg beast, and everything that you see here in red and blue has been 3D printed. So they moved more towards a device that is 3D printed, and I'm going to use this one just to show you a little bit about how this works. So this is my son Max's. After we built this one, this was the next one that we built. So this is actually the hand that he used for a while until he outgrew it. But when he bends his wrist down, it causes the fingers to clench, and then when he bends his wrist up, a series of elastics here cause the hand to open up again. So it's body powered. It's the act of bending his wrist that causes the fingers to clench, and then it's all sort of this motion that causes the movement of the hand. So this was one that we built, and then we built this one, which is another model, and Max is on about his 5th hand that students at our school have built for him, and now he is he's a deep devotee of the world of 3D printing, and he has this idea that although he's only 6, he already is now doing some designing with Tinkercad. Not anything to do with 3D printing, but just fun things for himself. So our family is now deeply entrenched in this. In terms of how the foundation went, as more and more hands began to be developed by the community, and more schools came on board, we realized that there was a need for somebody to coordinate the education side of this, just because a lot of schools wanted to help, but they didn't necessarily know, maybe as your organization is also running into, they weren't really sure how to go about doing it. So I came on almost 2 years ago as the Enable Community Foundation's education coordinator. And my first capacity, I was a volunteer. So not only as a father and an educator, I'm also a trainer for teachers in a pedagogical method called project-based learning. So I teach teachers how to do that. So because of those various hats, they asked me if I would be interested in starting as a volunteer, and then gradually, we have hundreds of schools around the world that are printing off components and building hands, because of the large number of schools. So I now have a formal position with the Enable Community Foundation, as their education coordinator. And so what we do, so our foundation, I think you get a sense of what we do. We encourage people to build the devices that are on our website, and then those devices actually get submitted to our organization and put into what we call our device pool. I like to make sure that we are completely transparent with where the devices go. Not every hand that is produced goes to a child that needs them. We're in this very wonderful position of having way more builders than we do children that would use the device. So that's part of it. But also we're realizing there's a wide variety of possible uses for the devices. So for example, this past weekend, I was in New York City presenting at the World Maker Faire. We had thousands of people come by a little booth that we had, and we had a wide arrangement of 20 to 30 hands, some of which schools had produced. So some of the hands go to educational events like that. Some go to actual recipients who use them because they have a condition similar to my son. Some go to occupational and physiotherapists to help them train. Some are just given away to help kind of seed interest and spark interest in the whole idea of open source design and 3D printing and assistive devices and the whole direction that movement is going. So what we, in addition to do in our education organization, in addition to encouraging schools and other youth organizations to build hands and finding a place for those hands, we are also, I've actually just finished writing curriculum for the project. And in fact, I'll share the link of our curriculum. We just released it this weekend in association with our presence at the World Maker Faire. The curriculum, as everything associated with Enable Community Foundation, is free and open source, and anybody can download it. And so the curriculum provides not only the instructions on how to build the devices, but also opportunities to leverage interest in this to teach concepts related to STEM and empathy and trying to get folks to understand what it takes to solve a problem. We also have some 3D designing components of our curriculum. So one thing I should mention, and in a second I'm going to take a break because I feel like I'm doing all the talking and I want to see how your questions are. But just by way of explanation, these hands are very good for grasping, but they're not super good for like long-term grasping. So for example, my son, if he wants to ride his bicycle with this hand, it's tough for him to keep it in its clenched position for a long period of time. That means he's going to have to bend his wrist down like that for a long period of time. So there's actually an adapter that goes on the hand, and students can design small activity purpose clips to go into that adapter. And for anything that requires long-term grasping, like for example, holding a drumstick, that drumstick can just snap into that adapter, and now the child or the person doesn't have to keep their arm flexed down like that. It just gets mounted in there. And I would love to show you one of these, but the reason I can't show it to you is because my son is using it. Today he has a drum lesson after school today, so he has his hand with the adapter on it and the drum clip that was actually designed by an 11-year-old at our school. So there's some real design potential in these adapters. and I'll be happy to send you some files for that as well. Also, some information about what that looks like. But we're also trying to embed some 3D designing into our work, because we realize that educators want more for their students than just the simple building and sending of hands. We actually want to leverage that interest to get kids doing some real life problem solving and designing, and also learning about the STEM things behind it. So, and the last thing I will say, and then I'm happy to, actually I'll say two last things, and then I'll answer your question. In addition to that, we've also created some interesting things for educational organizations to use to take this work to another level. So we often find there are schools that are really interested in the 3D printed prosthetic movement, but they often are then looking for other opportunities as well. So we've created a couple of things. One thing I'll share with you, here at my school, we've created something called the Problem Bank, the 3D Problem Bank. And what that is just a website at our school where anybody can post a problem in need of a 3D design solution. And then students just take those problems that are posted there and they design the solutions to them, and they work with the people that posted them to create authentic solutions to actual problems here in our school. And recently we've taken that same idea and moved it out of the school. And we actually have our students working with some seniors at a seniors residence just down the road, and they meet with them and they interview the seniors and try to find out what are some limitations or some things that they're finding difficult, and then our kids start to prototype and then design actual assistive devices for the seniors. And so what we do there is certainly we start with with prosthetics and hands, but what we're finding is this is just the beginning of a movement to try to convince students that it is possible for kids to design incredible solutions to problems, and then we're providing them with just inspiration to do that in their communities. And we feel strongly that that doesn't have to just end with 3D printing. It should branch out from there, and kids should feel empowered to solve problems in their communities regardless of the problem. The last thing I was going to say, so our foundation, Enable Community Foundation, for the first couple of years, these were the devices that we built. We usually do them in very bright colors. My son's hand that he's using for his drum lesson tonight is bright green. We often use a superhero theme so that kids feel like they're becoming superheroes. They have a chance to personalize the device by asking for specific colors or designs or things like that. We actually branched out from this, and so all of these designs are designed from folks who are just volunteers in our organization. We've now begun to move into arms. So we've got some really interesting, so this is a 3D designed arm prosthetic for somebody who has no arm below kind of the mid of the radius here. And so this is a 3D printed arm. And in addition to that, what we're seeing is some real interesting global expansion. We notice that these hands are not so popular once we leave the United States necessarily. Oftentimes what folks are looking for is a very hyper-realistic cosmetic prosthetic that allows them to pass through their regular workday without people necessarily noticing that they might have an amputation or an upper limb difference. So what we're finding is great demand globally for those sorts of simple but very cosmetic devices, and we're developing techniques for both designing and printing those in any country. And that actually feels like the direction that our organization is going is to address that global need for prosthetics. We still continue to encourage these fun, kind of interesting hands. And for example, when I think of my son, he gets the functionality of it, but oftentimes what's more important to him is just the fact that he's wearing this really interesting, almost robotic device. And when he walks in school and he's wearing this hand, he becomes like a superstar, as opposed to maybe a student that would receive comments from other kids about his hand that's quite different than theirs. So that, in one long breath, is just a brief overview of my story and our organization, and a little bit about what we do. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, first of all, let me say cheers to the internet for bringing you into this and allowing it to evolve so rapidly and to spread so rapidly and to involve so many people in a positive way. Yeah. I would like to see a similar evolution locally, in that our club starts with learning prosthetic hands, but
Right.
the children become stimulated to become creators and creative enough
Wonderful.
to solve problems.
I love
I'm
that.
losing your audio.
Nope, that sounds wonderful.
Right. So I guess it's always the first step where you bring the idea, and then the idea grows, and young children have fertile minds, and I think it will indeed grow. What I would like to know though, can we get some hands that you are using maybe for demonstration purposes, so that when we move on to our next phase, I can have actual models to show while we learn the process?
I believe I can. I believe I can do that. Yep. We have some hands here built by students. They may not be. In fact, what we try to encourage schools to do is, if you do a large build. So, for example, if you had 60 students that you are potentially working with, you may produce up to 20 hands depending on your 3D printing. It's usually the speed of the 3D printers that's the limiting factor. To print this hand, this was about an 18-hour print, and so oftentimes we find that it's primarily the speed of the printing that is the limiting factor. What we encourage schools to do is if they build a large number of hands, that many of them actually stay in-house in the school. They send the best ones off to us to get sent to any of those purposes that I aligned. So our school has a number of those hands around, and yeah, I could find at least one to send to you, so that you might see a model of that. If you can just send me your address, I'll be happy to do that.
Sure. So I am also toying with the idea of using a kit. I know on the website there were build kits that you can use initially before you even start doing your own 3D printing.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking go through that with the test build, make sure the methods are okay, the use of the software is comfortable for the students, the teachers understand, and then actually do our own 3D printing after.
Right. I think that's a great idea. Depending on how many hands you are thinking of building, but I think that is often a route that schools will occasionally go. One thing, have you found the link to both the kit with the 3D printed pieces and the hardware and everything with it?
Yes. I read through all the files that you had sent me, and when I joined the community, there was a link to some pages that had all the steps and what was involved. So I've read through those. And I was just thinking, since we don't own our own 3D printer, but we do have a local company that will be collaborating with us,
I see.
that maybe starting to iron out our problems with build, using the kits might be suitable for that.
I think that's a great idea. One thing I would also recommend, I'm not sure if you have seen the Google Plus community, the Enable Google Plus community, but there are thousands of folks in that community, and I can send you the link to it. Our foundation runs slightly separate from that community. That's an open source community. Our foundation has started to really just drill down on the idea of education and the global expansion. But in that community, if you were to post a request for somebody or a school to send you a kit, you could possibly augment the kits that you're purchasing with pieces that were printed by another school. And I'll just throw that out there as a possible route that sometimes schools go.
Right. Sounds pretty good. So
Wonderful.
I'm actually quite excited for Sunday because I want to get this off the ground. And I think once it gets moving along, things will actually just mushroom and we'll get closer and closer to our goals. I will keep in touch, and I do hope at a future time with the students you'll be able to Skype in. And I'm sure they'll have more questions than I do.
I would love to
having
do that.
not read all of the stuff and all the emails that you've sent me, they would be starting from a lower level. So
Absolutely.
is there anything you want to ask me?
Tell me a little bit about the timeline. So you meet them this Sunday, and then are you seeing them again on successive days?
Yeah, because of their current school day structure and curriculum, I can see us meeting once per month, not more frequently for now. Yeah. When teachers get comfortable with it or the students get more comfortable, I can see it happening more often, but I really have to introduce it gradually.
Wonderful. And I would say oftentimes we have students that become so motivated to do the work that oftentimes students are just asking to take the printed components and some of the hardware home, and they arrive a week later with a built hand. And so you may see that kind of interest also from your students as well. So one other thing I would mention that seems to really be a helpful think for some schools is involving occupational therapists or physiotherapists in the work, at least making them aware of it, and
Right.
in some cases bringing them on board. They have a wonderful perspective in terms of um, you know not doing harm with recipients and just to give their perspective on the use of assistive devices. Also, we're looking. One thing we're really, and this is a place where you might be able to really provide us with some information. Here in the United States, we have a good system for recipient families. So families with a child with an upper limb difference contact us, and then we supply them with a device, and we do that matching. That's a little tougher for us to do outside of the continental United States. So what we're trying to do is look for ways in sort of small locales outside of the U.S. to have organizations possibly start to look for their own, recipients in their communities, organizations that might provide support for families of children with upper limb differences. And so if you were to maybe involve your students in some of that work, like looking to see what's available in terms of services and seeing if there might be families or recipients that would be willing to be involved in a partnership with you, then that allows us to provide a more authentic endpoint for the devices that your kids would produce. Of course, you're more than welcome to send them here stateside, and we will find good places for them. But we're just trying to, again, in the same way that we're crowdsourcing everything we do, we're also looking to crowdsource that whole matching up
Yes.
organizations that are producing hands with families that might benefit. So
Our ultimate goal is to service local recipients, ultimately,
wonderful.
but we certainly want to use your model to develop our perfection at it first.
Right.
Fortunately, because of our involvement with the Rotary Club, and I've been in Rotary 2 years as community services director, we did many projects with occupational therapists before. They worked with us on a project for autistic children.
Right.
So I have them already in a group, and they're very closely connected with us. So I could actually invite them to the launch on
Oh, that
Sunday
would be wonderful.
or
Yeah.
to a future time. And we also, my husband is a pediatrician, and he works with neonates. And sometimes we have a lot of amniotic band syndrome type
Right.
children who need help. And he can actually link with the pediatricians in that pediatric society in Trinidad to get families who I need to come forward and collaborate. So the network is actually quite strong when it comes to that perspective. But because we have not actually launched anything yet,
Yes.
I hesitate to say to them, come now. It's going to be like build it and they will come kind of concept where
Right.
we started off and they see that we exist and I reach out and they come forward.
Wonderful. Well, we will continue to support you as you go forward there. That sounds like you have an amazing. What we're really looking for are teams and support systems, as opposed to just, for example, a school and a family working together. We find that the more pediatricians and occupational therapists that we can involve in, it just helps to improve the continuum of care and also just the quality of the work that's being done. So
Yeah.
that sounds like a wonderful opportunity to do some pilot work of a.
It's the beauty of, I think it's the beauty of Rotary International
Right.
being very structured in how they do work.
Right.
And having built networks over 100 years of existence, that every time we do a project, we meet somebody new who we can do something more with. So therefore, me coming to you, I would have benefited from the background of having known pediatricians and occupational therapists before and thinking, well, prosthetic hands is something we need. This actually came about because we got a letter from somebody who wanted a lower limb.
Oh,
and we couldn't help
right.
them locally for the lower limb.
Right.
But I did see upper limb being a possibility.
Right. And we're actually, right now, the 3D printing plastics are not strong enough to accommodate the forces involved in lower limb prosthetics, but we're certainly heading in that direction. And so once we feel like the material science is up to it, that's likely going to be our next area of development. So it's very exciting movement, and we sort of feel like we're in the middle of something very, very historical. So we're excited to involve your Rotary and your students in this. So.
Okay, I will keep in touch. I hope your trip goes well on Sunday.
Thank you.
And you'll get emails from me. I know you probably get hundreds of emails. So when you get to them, you get to them.
Yep.
So I'll let you know how Sunday goes.
Wonderful.
And I'll send you my address to get the models.
Great.
to plan for my next phase.
Wonderful. I will send you a video of this conversation, and I've actually just sent an email that has the link to our curriculum that we've just released, and you might see some interesting things in there. And there's also the password there for the curriculum that you'll need. And I want to say I'm very invested in this relationship. We are very excited about the possibility of expanding this work globally, and anytime we find an organization or an individual outside of the United States that seems particularly motivated, we would like to nurture that relationship, and we feel that with you. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. And you're right, it may be a few days sometimes before I can. In addition to my work with the Enable Community Foundation, I'm also a teacher, and I also have two little ones, so I'm a little busy these days. But I try to get back to the requests when I can. So
I have two teenagers,
oh, you
and
do?
They're both going to come with me on Sunday to the project.
Ah, wonderful.
One of them belongs to the school that's having the launch, and another one is in another school. But they both want to come, and they both want to be part of it. So
wonderful.
My husband, the pediatrician, he's going to come as well.
Fantastic.
So it's going to be a family affair plus a school thing. It's a nice link. I'm going to invite key teachers in the school to attend, so that if curriculum changes or modifications have to be made, they'll be aware that this is available as a possibility.
Wonderful. That sounds great. Please have them reach out to me if they have any questions. I should mention that I've actually visited Trinidad.
Right. You were on your way from Venezuela?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I already shared that with you. Oh,
South America. Yeah. We're quite close. I have never been to Massachusetts. I have friends who live in Massachusetts because I actually did my postgrad in New York.
You did? Okay.
So I'm kind of familiar with the area. But the world is smaller now because of the internet.
That's for sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
So we will definitely keep in touch, and thank you so much for doing this.
I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. I'll look out for your video. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.